My name is Clara, and for 26 years, I was the stain on the silk tablecloth of the Hayes dynasty. If you ask the tabloids, I was the reclusive, slightly unstable daughter who couldn't handle the pressure of high society. If you asked my mother, Elaine, I was a charity case, a mistake she graciously kept around to prove her own sainthood. But if you asked my father, my real father, Jonathan Hayes, he would have told you the truth. That is, if he hadn't died of a sudden, convenient heart attack 2 weeks before he could sign his new will. But tonight, I wasn't going to let dead men stay silent. Tonight, I was going to scream for him. I sat at the far end of the table, gripping my napkin until my knuckles turned white. We were at the rehearsal dinner for my sister Victoria's wedding. The room was suffocatingly expensive, filled with the scent of lilies and roasted duck. 120 guests, the creme de la creme of the city's business elite, were murmuring politely, unaware that they were sitting in a blast zone. My mother stood up. The room went silent instantly. Elaine Hayes had that effect on people. She was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a diamond that could cut glass. She smoothed her silver gown, raised her champagne flute, and smiled. It was her public smile, the one that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice melodic and projecting perfectly to the back of the hall. "Tomorrow, my daughter Victoria marries into another great family. It is a celebration of legacy, of pure bloodlines continuing." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I felt a cold sweat prickle down my spine. I knew that tone. She was bored with peace. She wanted blood. "Family is a complex thing," Elaine continued, tilting her head as she scanned the room. "Some people are born into this family. They carry the Hayes name, the burden, and the glory." She gestured to Victoria, who looked radiant and smug, and my brother Daniel, who was busy checking his watch. And some others. Her eyes locked onto me. It felt like a physical blow. Some others are just admitted because of our kindness, because of my charity. A ripple of uncomfortable whispers moved through the crowd. Guests shifted in their seats, glancing at me with pity or curiosity. But Elaine wasn't done. She wanted to make sure I was buried before I could even take a breath. "There have been rumors lately," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "About inheritances. About rights. So, I want to clear the air before the big day. Jonathan Hayes was a generous man. He opened his home to a child who wasn't his." She pointed a manicured finger straight at me. "Clara," she said, spitting my name like it was a curse. "You have been acting as if you have a seat at this table. But, let's be honest. Jonathan never claimed you. He never signed your birth certificate. You were my mistake, and he was sane enough to let you stay in the guest house. But you are not a Hayes." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a heart breaking. Victoria looked down at her plate, suppressing a smile. Daniel just stared at the ceiling. Elaine looked at me with triumph. She expected me to do what I always did: cry, run away, and let her spin the story that poor, crazy Clara was having another episode. She had spent years laying the groundwork for this moment, telling everyone I was mentally unstable, sending me to fake therapy sessions, and isolating me from our extended family. But I didn't run. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was crystal clear. I picked up the large, white preservation box I had placed under my chair and set it onto the table with a heavy thud. The silverware rattled. "What is that?" Victoria hissed. "Clara, sit down. You're ruining my dinner." "He did admit it," I said, my voice shaking slightly before finding its strength. I looked directly at Elaine. "He claimed me every single day. You just didn't know it because you were too busy erasing me." "Sit down." Elaine snapped, her mask slipping. "Security." "I wouldn't," I warned, my hand resting on the lid of the box. "Not unless you want the police to see what's in here right now." The security guards hesitated. The guests were leaning forward, hooked by the drama. "You say he never claimed me?" I asked, opening the box. "You're right about one thing, Mother. You erased his name from my birth certificate. I remember finding it in your desk when I was 11. Father's name, blank. You made sure I felt like a ghost in my own home. I pulled the contents of the box out. It wasn't a weapon or a stack of papers. It was a dress. An old, yellowing wedding dress with intricate lace sleeves. Elaine's face went pale. She recognized it instantly. It was the dress she had worn the day she married Jonathan. Put that away, she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine fear for the first time in my life. Why? I asked, holding the dress up for the room to see. Are you afraid of a little nostalgia? Or are you afraid of what Dad hid inside the one thing he knew you would never look at again? I thought back to the day the war between us truly began. I was 6 years old, sitting on the living room floor, drawing a picture of our family. I had drawn a tall stick figure and labeled it Daddy. Elaine had snatched the paper, ripped it into shreds, and grabbed my face. Call him Uncle Jonathan, she had hissed.
He is not your father.
You are a guest here. That was the rule. I had to call my own father Uncle whenever guests were around. It was a humiliation ritual. And then there was the fire. When I was 11, I found a photo of Jonathan holding me as a baby, looking at me with pure adoration. I showed it to Elaine, thinking it would prove I was loved. She took the photo, walked to the kitchen stove, and burned it in front of my eyes. We clean up messes, Clara, she had said as my father's face turned to ash. And you're a mess. But she was wrong. I wasn't the mess. I was the evidence. Jonathan knew, I told the silent room, snapping back to the present.
He knew everything.
He knew about your affair with his business partner. He knew that the Hayes legacy you're so proud of, I gestured to Victoria and Daniel, was a lie. She's lying. Elaine shrieked. She's insane. Get her out of here. He didn't say anything because he wanted to protect the children. I continued, speaking faster now. He didn't want to destroy the company with a scandal. But he knew you were circling him like a vulture. He knew you were planning to push him out. And he knew his life was in danger. I grabbed the hem of the wedding dress. My father had told me on his deathbed, in those few lucid moments before the heart attack took him, find the white dress. It's in the lining. He left this for me, I said. Not for you. For the daughter he actually loved. I ripped the silk lining of the bodice. The sound of tearing fabric was violent and loud in the quiet hall. Hidden between the layers of silk and lace was a thick envelope and a small, silver USB drive. Elaine looked like she was about to faint. She knew what was on that drive. She knew it contained the emails she had sent threatening him. She knew it contained the audio recordings. You wanted to talk about bloodlines? I asked, holding up the USB drive. You wanted to talk about who really belongs at this table? Let's look at the DNA results Dad hid in your wedding dress. I turned to the projectionist, who was standing by the laptop used for the couple's photo montage. Plug this in, I ordered. Don't you dare. Elaine lunged at me, her fingernails aiming for my face. I sidestepped her, and she stumbled, catching herself on the table. Her perfect hair was finally out of place. It's over, Mother, I said coldly. The truth is coming out. And it's not just about me. I handed the USB to the stunned projectionist. Play it. The young man manning the projector looked like a deer in headlights. He held the silver USB drive in his hand, looking back and forth between me, the furious woman in the silver gown who was effectively his boss, and the 100 or so wealthy guests who were watching the scene unfold with morbid fascination. Do it, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Unless you want to be known as the guy who helped hide a 20-year fraud. He made his choice. Maybe he was tired of Elaine's demands too. He plugged the drive into the laptop. Elaine lunged for the table again, but this time, her own brother, Uncle Marcus, caught her arm. He looked confused, his brow furrowed. Elaine, stop. If there's nothing to hide, let the girl play her little slideshow. You're making it worse. You don't understand. Elaine hissed, struggling against his grip. She falsified it. It's all fake. The screen behind the head table flickered. The montage of Victoria and her fiancé, Greg, engaging in staged candid laughter vanished. In its place, a stark, white document appeared. The resolution was high enough that people in the back could read the bold headings. It was a DNA paternity test. Exhibit A, I said, stepping away from the table so everyone could see. Dated 3 months ago. Sample provided by Jonathan Hayes and Clara Hayes. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. I pointed to the bottom of the document, where the probability of paternity was circled in red. 99.99%. You told everyone tonight that Jonathan never claimed me, I said, looking at Elaine, who had gone deadly silent. You told the board of directors I was a charity case. You told me I was a mistake. But this document proves that I am the only person in this room who shares his blood. Victoria stood up, her face blotchy. So what? Dad slept around. We always knew that. You're just his bastard. That doesn't make you family. I looked at my sister. I actually felt a pang of pity for her. She was cruel, yes, and shallow, but she was also a product of Elaine's manufacturing. She was about to be broken into pieces. Click the next file, I told the projectionist. He hit the arrow key. The screen changed. It was another DNA report, but this one had 3 columns. 1 for Jonathan Hayes, 1 for Victoria Hayes, and 1 for Daniel Hayes. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the projector fan. What is this? Daniel asked, his voice cracking. He stood up slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. Read it, Daniel, I said softly. The probability of paternity for both Victoria and Daniel was 0%. That's a lie. Elaine shrieked. It was a primal sound, like an animal caught in a trap. Turn it off. Turn it off right now. Jonathan Hayes is not your father, I said, addressing my siblings directly. He knew it. He found out 5 years ago. That's why he started pulling away. That's why he spent so much time at the office. He wasn't working. He was grieving. He was grieving the family he thought he had. Victoria looked at her mother. Mom?
What is she talking about?
Elaine straightened her dress, trying to regain her composure, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit. She forged them, Victoria. Don't listen to her. She's sick. The next file, I commanded. No, Elaine shouted. The projectionist clicked. This time it wasn't a document.
It was a video file.
The audio crackled through the banquet hall's expensive sound system. The image was grainy, taken from a hidden camera, likely inside Jonathan's study. It showed Elaine sitting on the leather sofa. She wasn't alone. Sitting next to her, with his hand resting familiarly on her knee, was Marcus. Not my Uncle Marcus, but Marcus Sterling, my father's business partner. The man who is currently sitting at table 4, eating roast beef. A murmur of shock waved through the room. People turned to look at Marcus Sterling, whose face had drained of all color. On the screen, Elaine was laughing. It was a cruel, mocking sound. Jonathan is weak, the Elaine on the screen said. He suspects, but he won't do anything. He cares too much about the family image. He won't divorce me because he doesn't want the scandal to hurt the kids. And the will? Marcus asked in the video. I'm handling it, Elaine replied, sipping a drink. He's rewriting it, but I'll make sure it never gets filed. If he dies before he signs the new one, everything goes to me. The company, the house, the assets. And we can finally push him out of the picture for good. The video cut to black. The silence in the room was now heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of 100 people realizing they had been dining with a monster. Elaine wasn't moving. She stood frozen, staring at the black screen. The mask was gone. There was no grieving widow left. There was only a woman who had been caught. He didn't die of a heart attack, did he? I asked. My voice was trembling now, not from fear, but from rage. He was healthy. He was 48. But 2 weeks after he told you he was going to the lawyers to finalize the divorce and the new will, he just dropped dead. You little witch, Elaine whispered. She walked toward me. Her eyes were black with hate. I gave you a home. I fed you. You kept me as a pet. I yelled back. You kept me around to make yourself look like a saint, all while you were erasing my father's legacy. You burned his photos. You made me call him uncle, and all the while, you were the one lying to him every single day. Elaine stopped a few feet from me. She looked at the guests, then at Victoria and Daniel. Victoria was sobbing into her hands. Daniel was staring at Elaine with a look of pure horror. I did what I had to do to protect this family, Elaine shouted, addressing the room. Jonathan was unstable. He was going to ruin the company with his sentimental garbage. I saved the Hayes empire. I built this. No, I said firmly. You stole it. Security. Elaine screamed, pointing at me. Get her out. She's dangerous. She's threatening me. Two large security guards, who had been watching the scene in confusion, finally stepped forward. They were paid by Elaine, after all. They moved toward me, their expressions grim. I wouldn't touch her. A deep voice boomed from the back of the room. The doors to the banquet hall swung open. A man in a charcoal suit walked in. He was older, with silver hair and a briefcase in his hand. He walked with the confidence of someone who owned the law. It was Arthur Pendleton, my father's personal attorney, the man Elaine thought she had fired years ago. Mr. Pendleton, Elaine said, her voice faltering. You weren't invited. No, Pendleton said, walking past the stunned guests to stand beside me. But my client was. Your client is dead, Elaine snapped. My client, Pendleton said, gesturing to me, is standing right here. He placed his briefcase on the table, right next to the wedding dress box. We have been waiting for this moment, Elaine, Pendleton said calmly. We knew you would try to dispute the paternity. We knew you would try to claim Clara was unstable. Jonathan predicted every single move you made. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. This, he announced to the room, is the last will and testament of Jonathan Hayes. It was signed, witnessed, and filed with the state registry 3 days before his death. It supersedes any previous arrangements. That's impossible, Elaine whispered. I checked the safe. It wasn't there. He didn't keep it in the safe, I said. He kept it with the one person he trusted. Pendleton adjusted his glasses and looked at the crowd. The deceased has left explicit instructions. Due to the evidence of infidelity and fraud, which we have just seen confirmed, Mrs. Elaine Hayes is disinherited completely. She receives 0% of the estate. A gasp went through the room again. This was financial execution. Furthermore, Pendleton continued, Jonathan Hayes has left 40% of his assets to the Hayes Foundation for Children, and the remaining 60%, along with the controlling interest in Hayes Industries, is left to his sole biological heir. He looked at me. Clara Hayes. The weight of the name settled on me. I wasn't Clara the orphan anymore. I wasn't Clara the mistake. I was the owner of everything. Elaine looked like she had been slapped. She turned to Victoria and Daniel. This is ridiculous. Children, do something. She's stealing your birthright. Victoria looked up, mascara running down her face. She looked at me, then at Elaine. My birthright, she laughed hysterically. You just told the whole world my birthright is a lie. Who is my father, Mom? Is it Marcus? Is it the tennis coach? Victoria, please, Elaine pleaded, reaching for her. Don't touch me. Victoria screamed, recoiling. She grabbed a wine glass and threw it at the wall. It shattered, red wine splashing like blood. You made me hate her.
She pointed at me.
My whole life, you told me Clara was the problem. You told me she was the shame of the family.
And it was you.
It was you the whole time. Daniel stood up. He was pale, shaking.
He looked at me.
Clara, he said. Is it true? About the DNA? It's true, Daniel, I said softly. Then, he looked at his hands. Then I'm nobody. No, I said. You're Daniel. You're my brother. Not by blood, maybe, but we grew up in the same hell. That counts for something. How can you say that? Elaine spat. After everything? Because, unlike you, I said, meeting her gaze, I don't need to destroy people to feel important. Elaine's face twisted. She realized she had lost the room. The guests were looking at her with disgust. The investors were already on their phones, likely calling their lawyers. Her social standing was evaporating by the second. Desperation took over. She grabbed a steak knife from the table. "You ruin everything," she screamed, lunging at me. It happened in slow motion. The glint of silver under the chandeliers. Pendleton shouting. But she didn't get to me. Security, realizing who actually signed their checks now, tackled her. The knife clattered to the floor, sliding under the wedding dress box. Elaine was pinned to the ground, her immaculate hair ruined, her dress twisted. She was screaming, guttural sounds of rage and defeat. "I built this family. I am the Hayes legacy. You are nothing," she howled as they hauled her up. I looked down at her. "You didn't build a family, Mother. You built a corporation. And you just went bankrupt." The police arrived 10 minutes later. Pendleton had called them before he even walked in. They took the USB drive as evidence. They took the wedding dress. And they took Elaine. As they let her out in handcuffs, the flash of cameras from the paparazzi, who had somehow gotten wind of the disaster, blinded us through the windows. The headline tomorrow wouldn't be about Victoria's wedding. It would be about the fall of the Queen. The room began to clear out. Guests muttered apologies, looking at the floor, fleeing the scene of the crime. I stood alone by the head table. My hand rested on the empty preservation box. Victoria had run out the back door in tears. Daniel had vanished.
Pendleton walked up to me.
"Are you okay, Clara?" "I don't know," I admitted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted. "You have a lot of decisions to make," he said. "The company, the house, the press." "I know. You could burn them, you know," Pendleton said quietly. "With what's on that drive and with the power you have now, you could ensure Victoria and Daniel never see a dime. You could destroy Elaine until she's in prison for life." I looked at the shattered wine glass on the floor. I looked at the chair where my father used to sit, empty for so long. "I'm not her," I said. "I'm his daughter." I picked up the preservation box. "I don't want the house," I said. "Sell it. Give the money to the foundation." "And the company?" "I'll take the company," I said, a steely resolve settling in my chest. "Someone needs to clean up the mess." I walked out of the banquet hall, into the cool night air. I didn't look back at the wreckage of the rehearsal dinner. I had walked in a ghost, and I was walking out as CEO. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one more thing I had to do. 6 months later. The cemetery was quiet. The grass was green, vivid against the gray of the headstones. I walked up the path, the gravel crunching under my boots. I stopped in front of a simple granite marker. Jonathan Hayes, beloved father. I didn't bring flowers. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small square of fabric. It was a piece of lace I had cut from the wedding dress before the police took it. I placed it on top of the cold stone. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "Everyone knows. You aren't the man who is fooled anymore. You're the man who fought back." I stood there for a long time. The wind blew through the trees. I had legally changed my name the week after the dinner. I was just Clara Hayes now. No middle name from Elaine. Elaine was awaiting trial for fraud and embezzlement. The evidence on the USB had opened a Pandora's box of financial crimes she had committed with Marcus Sterling. Victoria had called off the wedding and moved to Europe to find herself. Daniel had reached out to me once, asking for a job. I gave him one. Starting at the bottom, in the mailroom. He took it. I wasn't alone anymore. I had the truth. "You're not a secret anymore," I said to the grave. "And neither am I." I turned and walked back toward the car where Pendleton was waiting. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking in one. I was walking in the light. The police had Elaine for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. They had enough evidence to lock her away for 10 to 15 years just based on what was in that wedding dress. But I wasn't satisfied. Every time I sat in my father's massive leather chair in the CEO's office, looking out over the city skyline, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Justice for the money wasn't enough. I needed justice for the man. The official story was a heart attack. My father, Jonathan Hayes, 48 years old, healthy as a horse, had just dropped dead in his study one evening. At the time, I was living in a small apartment across town, estranged and cut off. Elaine had called me the next morning, her voice thick with fake tears, telling me the tragic news. She had him cremated 3 days later. That was the part that kept waking me up at night. She had rushed the cremation. No autopsy. No viewing. Just ashes in an urn before I could even say goodbye. I knew she had killed him. I felt it in my marrow. But feeling it and proving it were two different things, especially when the body was gone. A week after the disaster at the rehearsal dinner, I sat down with Arthur Pendleton and a private detective named Vance. Vance was an ex-homicide cop who looked like he had seen everything and liked none of it. We were in the library of the Hayes Manor, a room I had been forbidden from entering as a child. "We have the emails from the USB," Vance said, sliding a printout across the mahogany desk. She threatened him. "If you think you can leave me and take the company, you'll leave in a box. It shows intent, Clara, but it's circumstantial. A good defense lawyer will say she was just an angry wife venting." "She switched his medication," I said. It was a theory I had been obsessing over. Dad was on mild blood pressure meds. If she messed with them... "We can't prove it," Arthur said gently. "The pills are gone. The bottle is gone. The body is ash." "Not everything is gone," I said, leaning forward. "There's the doctor. Dr. Leonard Vane. He was the family physician. He was the one who signed the death certificate at the house, citing myocardial infarction, so no coroner would be called. He was also a man who had suddenly paid off his mortgage 2 weeks after my father died. I had found the bank transfer records in the deeper files on the USB drive. Elaine had sent him $50,000 labeled as consulting fees. "I'm going to pay Dr. Vane a visit," I said. "Clara, that's dangerous," Arthur warned. "Let the police handle it." "The police are busy counting the embezzled money," I replied, standing up. "I need to look him in the eye." I found Dr. Vane at his private practice in the suburbs. It was a sterile, white building that smelled of antiseptic and fear. I didn't make an appointment. I just walked past the receptionist, pushed open his office door, and sat down. He looked up, startled. He was a small man with nervous eyes. When he saw me, he went pale. He knew who I was. Everyone in the city knew who I was now. "Miss Hayes," he stammered. I wasn't expecting you." "I bet you weren't," I said, placing my purse on my lap. "I'm here to talk about my father's heart attack." "It was a tragedy," he said quickly. Too quickly. "A sudden cardiac event. Very common in men his age with high stress." "He was healthy," I said. "He ran 5 miles a day. And he had a physical 2 months prior that gave him a clean bill of health." "You signed off on that physical too." Sweat beaded on his upper lip. "Things change. Bodies are unpredictable. Bank accounts are unpredictable too," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Like how yours suddenly grew by $50,000 the week after he died." Vane stopped breathing for a second. The silence in the room was heavy. "I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered. "I have the transfer records, doctor." I lied. I had the record of the money leaving Elaine's account, but not the confirmation it hit his. But he didn't know that. "The police have them too. They're building a case for accessory to murder. You know what happens to accessories? They go down just as hard as the killer unless they cooperate." He stood up, his hands shaking. "Get out." "Did she poison him?" I asked, not moving. "Did she use digoxin? Insulin? Or did she just swap his pills for something that would stop his heart?" I said, "Get out," he shouted, his voice cracking. I stood up slowly. "I'm leaving. But the detectives will be here within the hour. If you want to see your kids grow up, I suggest you start writing down exactly what happened that night. Elaine isn't going to protect you. She can't even protect herself right now." I walked out. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had him. I could smell the guilt on him like cheap cologne. 2 days later, Dr. Vane turned himself in. He didn't just talk, he sang. He admitted that Elaine had called him that night, not in a panic, but calmly. She told him Jonathan had collapsed. When Vane arrived, Jonathan was already dead. But Vane noticed something. There was a glass of scotch on the desk that smelled faintly of almonds, a sign of cyanide, Or perhaps something more subtle, like crushed cherry pits, which Elaine grew in the greenhouse. But Elaine had handed him an envelope with cash and promised the wire transfer. She told him to write, "heart attack," and get the body to the crematorium immediately.
He did it.
He was in debt, he was weak, and he was scared of her. With Vane's testimony, the charges against Elaine were upgraded. But we needed to nail the coffin shut. We needed to know exactly how she did it. The answer came from the most unlikely source, my brother, Daniel. I hadn't spoken to Daniel since the rehearsal dinner. He had been hiding out in a motel, avoiding the press. But one rainy Tuesday, he showed up at the Hayes Industries headquarters. He looked terrible unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, his eyes bloodshot. "Clara," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway of my office. "Daniel," I said, surprised to see him. "Come in." He walked in and slumped into a chair. "I heard about the murder charges," he said quietly. "Is it true? Did she really?" "We think so," I said. Dr. Vane confessed to covering it up. Daniel put his head in his hands.
He began to sob.
It wasn't the crying of a child. It was the deep, wrenching sobs of a man whose entire world had dissolved. "I saw something," he choked out. "I didn't know what it was at the time. I don't know what I thought." "What did you see, Daniel?" I asked gently. "The night Dad died," he said, wiping his eyes. "I was home. I was in the kitchen getting a snack late at night. Mom was there. She was grinding something in the mortar and pestle she uses for herbs. She said she was making a sleeping draught for Dad because he was stressed." He looked up at me, his eyes full of horror. "She poured it into a Scotch decanter, the one he always drank from before bed. She looked right at me and smiled. She said, 'This will help him rest, Daniel. We all need rest.'" My blood ran cold. She had used her own son as a witness, relying on his naivety and her manipulation to keep him quiet. "I heard him fall," Daniel whispered. About an hour later, I heard a thud from the study. I went to the door, but Mom was already there. She locked it from the outside. She told me to go to my room. She said Dad was just drunk and needed to sleep it off. I went to bed, Clara. I went to bed and let him die. "You didn't know," I said, walking around the desk and putting a hand on his shoulder. "You were a kid. She manipulated you." "I'm testifying," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "I want to testify against her." That was the nail in the coffin. The trial was the media event of the decade. The Black Widow of the Hayes Empire, they called her. Elaine tried to play the victim. She hired a new legal team, claiming Vane was lying to save himself and that Daniel was brainwashed by me. She sat in the courtroom looking frail and confused, trying to garner sympathy. But she underestimated the evidence from the dress. The prosecutor played the audio recordings I had found in the lining, the ones where she laughed about Jonathan being weak. They showed her character. Then Dr. Vane took the stand and detailed the cover-up. And finally, Daniel. When Daniel took the stand, Elaine's mask finally broke. She stared at him with such venom that the jury actually recoiled. "She told me it was medicine," Daniel told the court, his voice steady. "She used me to validate her alibi. But I saw her poison his drink." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, fraud, embezzlement. When the verdict was read, Elaine didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, frozen. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff her, she turned to look at me in the back of the courtroom. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a heavy, exhausting sense of completion. "You're still a bastard," she mouthed at me across the room. I just watched her go. She was going to a place where her name, her gowns, and her social standing meant nothing. She was going to a concrete box. After the trial, the cleanup began. I sold the mansion. I couldn't live there. Too many ghosts. I bought a modern penthouse in the city, something with light and open spaces. Victoria, my sister or half-sister, technically, had a harder time. The revelation that her father was likely a tennis pro she had never met broke her. But strangely, it also freed her. She stopped trying to be the perfect debutante. She moved to Paris, got a job in an art gallery under a pseudonym, and for the first time in her life, she was paying her own rent. We emailed occasionally. It was awkward, but it was real. Daniel stayed. He worked in the mailroom for 6 months, then moved to logistics. He refused any special treatment. He wanted to earn the name Hayes, even if he didn't have the blood. I respected that more than I could say. And me? I ran the company. I purged the board of directors who had been complicit with Elaine. I turned Hayes Industries toward green energy, something my father had always wanted to do, but was blocked by the profit-first mentality of Elaine and Marcus. But the real end of the story happened 6 months after the conviction. I received a package from the prison. It was from Elaine. I debated throwing it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology. No confession. Just a location. Safety Deposit Box 404. First National. I went to the bank. I had the power of attorney now, so I could access it. Inside the box was a small velvet pouch. I opened it and tipped the contents into my hand. It was a ring. Not her wedding ring. This was different. It was a simple gold band with a small, unique engraving on the inside. To see, love, Dad. And beneath it, a folded note in my father's handwriting. Clara, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. Elaine probably took this ring from me. It was my mother's. I wanted to give it to you when you graduated, but I was afraid she would take it. She must have kept it as a trophy.
Take it back.
It belongs to the only woman who ever truly understood what family means. I slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I walked out of the bank and into the sunlight. The city was moving, loud and chaotic, but for the first time in 26 years, I didn't feel like I was fighting to exist in it. I wasn't the girl in the guest house. I wasn't the mistake. I was Clara Hayes. And I was finally free. They tell you that the truth sets you free. That's the line in all the movies. You expose the villain, the police sirens wail, the bad guy goes to jail, and the hero walks into the sunset while the credits roll. But real life doesn't have credits. It just has the next morning. And the morning after that. Winning the company was the easy part. Keeping it was a nightmare. 3 weeks after I visited my father's grave, the real war began. I was sitting in the CEO's office, my father's old office, staring at a spreadsheet that made no sense. The numbers were bleeding red. While Elaine had been busy poisoning my father and curating her socialite image, she had also been treating the company accounts like her personal piggy bank. But she hadn't done it alone. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Hayes? Mr. Sterling is here to see you. My stomach tightened. Marcus Sterling. The man in the video. The man who had his hand on my mother's knee while they plotted to steal my inheritance. The police had raided his home when they arrested Elaine, but Marcus was slippery. He was a cockroach in a designer suit. He had cut a deal with the district attorney, turning over evidence against Elaine in exchange for immunity on the fraud charges. He was walking free while my mother rotted in a cell. Send him in, I said, leaning back in the leather chair. Marcus walked in like he still owned the place. He was wearing a navy suit that cost more than my first car. He didn't look like a man who had just narrowly avoided prison. He looked like a man who smelled opportunity. Clara, he said, smiling that oily smile. Or should I call you a mess CEO now? It's a big chair for such an inexperienced girl. It's Ms. Hayes, I said coldly. And the chair fits just fine. What do you want, Marcus? I have a company to fix. That's exactly why I'm here, he said, taking a seat without being invited. The stock is tanking, Clara. The shareholders are panicked. They don't trust a 26-year-old artist with a family history of mental instability, Elaine's words, not mine, to run a billion-dollar conglomerate. The shareholders know I exposed the fraud. I countered. They know I'm the one cleaning up the mess you and Elaine made. They know you're the daughter of a murderer and a dead man, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a patronizing purr. And let's be honest, the bastard child narrative is great for tabloids, but bad for business. The board is meeting next week. I'm going to propose a vote of no confidence. I stared at him. You don't have the votes. My father left me 60%. He left you 60% of the assets, Marcus corrected, pulling a document from his pocket. But the voting rights on the Class B shares? Those are tied up in a trust that requires a competency hearing if the heir is inexperienced. I helped write the bylaws, Clara. I know where the bodies are buried because I dug the holes.
He slid a folder across the desk.
Resign, he said. Step down. Let me take over as interim CEO. We'll give you a nice payout. You can go paint your pictures in Italy with Victoria, and we'll pretend this never happened. I opened the folder. It was a resignation letter, already typed up. All it needed was my signature. And if I don't, then I drag this company through the mud, Marcus said, standing up. I'll leak stories about your time in therapy. I'll make you look so unstable that the courts will force you out. You took down your mother, Clara. Do you really have the stomach to fight me too? He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. You have until the board meeting on Friday. When the door clicked shut, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt that same cold, sharp rage I had felt at the rehearsal dinner. I picked up the phone. Get me Daniel. He's in logistics. 10 minutes later, Daniel walked in. He looked different than he had at the funeral. He was wearing a blue work uniform, his hands were rougher, and he looked tired. But his eyes were clear. The entitlement was gone, replaced by a quiet, brooding intensity. You called, he asked, standing by the door. Sit down, Daniel, I said. I need your help. He sat, looking uncomfortable in the plush chair. If this is about the inventory mix-up in the warehouse, I swear I fixed it. It's not about the warehouse. It's about Marcus Sterling. I told him everything. The threat, the bylaws, the vote. He's going to try to steal it back, Daniel said, shaking his head. He's always been obsessed with this company. He hated Dad. He used to tell me Dad was soft. I need to find something on him, I said. Something the police missed. Something that proves he wasn't just an accomplice, but that he broke the company bylaws specifically. If I can prove he violated the morality clause in the original partnership agreement, his shares are forfeit. But I can't access the old physical archives without alerting him. He has eyes in the digital system. Daniel leaned forward. The physical archives are in the sub-basement. No one goes down there. It's full of rats and water damage. Can you get in? I have the master key for logistics, Daniel said, a small smile touching his lips. I can get us in anywhere. That night, at 2 a.m., the CEO and the mailroom boy broke into their own company. The sub-basement smelled of mold and old paper. It was a labyrinth of metal shelves stacked high with boxes dating back to the 1980s. Flashlights in hand, we started digging. What are we looking for? Daniel asked, sneezing as he moved a stack of invoices. The original partnership agreement from 1995, I said. And any correspondence between Marcus and the offshore accounts. The police only looked at the last 5 years. I bet Marcus has been skimming for 20. We worked in silence for hours. It was strange. For years, Daniel and I had lived in the same house but were worlds apart. He was the golden prince. I was the ghost. Now, sitting on the dusty concrete floor, eating vending machine sandwiches, we were just two people trying to save our father's legacy. I found him, Daniel said suddenly, breaking the silence. I looked up. He wasn't looking at a file. He was looking at his phone. Found who? My biological father, Daniel said. His voice was hollow. The private investigator called me this afternoon. I didn't want to tell you, because you have enough on your plate. I put down the file I was holding. Who is he? His name is Gary. He's a tennis instructor in Florida. He's been married 3 times. He has 6 other kids. Daniel laughed, a bitter, dry sound. Elaine didn't choose him for his genes. She chose him because he was the tennis pro at the club and she was bored. Are you going to meet him? I don't know, Daniel said. He looked at me, his eyes vulnerable. I always thought, even when I found out Dad wasn't my dad, I thought maybe I came from something special. Maybe a secret romance. A tragic love affair. But I'm just the product of a Tuesday afternoon fling. You're not defined by them, Daniel, I said fiercely. Elaine is a criminal. Gary is a stranger. You are the guy who is currently sitting in a basement at 3 a.m. helping his sister save the company. That's who you are. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. You called me your sister. I did. I treated you like dirt, Clara. For years. I let Mom talk about you like you were nothing. I laughed when she made you eat in the kitchen. You were a child, Daniel. And you were brainwashed. I'm not a child anymore, he said firmly. He reached into a box labeled 1998 legal. So, let's bury this son of a bitch, Marcus. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder.
Wait.
Look at this. He opened the binder. It wasn't financial records. It was a logbook, a handwritten diary of board decisions kept by my father. I shined my flashlight on the page Daniel was pointing to. June 12, 1998. Confronted Marcus about the shadow accounts in the Cayman Islands. He denied it. Threatened to dissolve the partnership if I went to the authorities. I can't risk the IPO. I have to play along for now. But I am keeping copies of the transfers in the safe deposit box at the old bank, the one under Clara's name. My breath caught in my throat. The one under my name? I whispered. Did you have a bank account when you were a baby? Daniel asked. No, wait. I remembered something. A vague memory of my father taking me to a small community bank when I was 7. He had given me a lollipop and told me to sign a card. He said it was for my college fund. The First National Bank on 5th Street, I said, scrambling up. That's where the ring was. Box 404. But there was another box key in the envelope with the ring. I thought it was a spare. I dug into my purse. I carried that ring and the contents of that velvet pouch everywhere. I pulled out the small, brass key. It had the number 405 stamped on it. He hid the evidence against Marcus right next to the ring. I realized. He knew. He knew that if I found the ring, I'd find the weapon. The board meeting on Friday was a bloodbath. The conference room was packed. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around the oval table. Marcus sat at the head, looking smug. He had already given his opening speech, painting me as a hysterical, incompetent heir who was ruining the stock value. It is with a heavy heart, Marcus said, clasping his hands, that I call for a motion to remove Clara Hayes as CEO and appoint myself as interim director, effective immediately. Seconded, said a balding man to his right, one of Marcus's golf buddies. All in favor? Marcus asked. 7 hands went up. It was enough. Well, Marcus said, turning to me with a pitying smile. The board has spoken. Clara, if you could please vacate the premises. Security will escort you. I didn't move. I stayed seated, my hands folded on the table. I'd like to make a motion, I said calmly. You're no longer the CEO, Marcus snapped. You have no motions. I am still the majority shareholder, I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the room. And under Article 15 of the company bylaws, a shareholder with more than 51% equity can call for an immediate dismissal of a board member if there is proof of gross moral turpitude or theft of company property. Marcus laughed. We've been over this. The police cleared me. The police cleared you of Elaine's crimes, I said. They didn't look at yours. I nodded to the door. Daniel walked in. He wasn't wearing his logistics uniform. He was wearing one of our father's old suits. It was a little big in the shoulders, but he wore it with pride. He was carrying a stack of files. Distribute them, please, I said. Daniel walked around the table, placing a photocopy of the 1998 logbook page and a stack of bank transfer records in front of every board member. What is this? The balding man asked. Proof, I said, staring directly at Marcus. That for the last 20 years, Marcus Sterling has been siphoning 3% of all international profits into a shell company called Sterling Ventures. My father knew about it, but he was blackmailed into silence. But dead men don't stay silent forever. Marcus went white. He grabbed the papers, his hands shaking. This is forged. This is ancient history. It's not history, I said. The last transfer was made last week. While you were helping the police, you were moving your assets to avoid seizure. That is a federal crime, Marcus. And it's definitely a violation of the company bylaws. I looked at the board members. Their hands were down now. They were reading the documents with horror. I moved to dismiss Marcus Sterling from the board and strip him of his shares, I said. And I moved to press charges for corporate embezzlement. Seconded, said Mrs. Gable, the woman who had covered her mouth at the rehearsal dinner. She looked at Marcus with disgust. Get him out of here. Marcus stood up, knocking his chair over. You can't do this. I built this company. Security, I said, echoing his earlier threat. The same guards who had taken Elaine away now stepped forward for Marcus. You're just like her, Marcus screamed as they dragged him out. You're cold. You're a witch. You're just like Elaine. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. No, I said, more to myself than to him. I'm nothing like her. She did it for greed. I did it for the truth. The room was silent. The board members looked at me with new eyes. There was no pity anymore. There was respect. And maybe a little bit of fear. Now, I said, sitting back down at the head of the table. Let's talk about the rebranding. I'm thinking we drop Hayes Industries. It sounds too much like the past. What do you propose? Mrs. Gable asked. I looked at Daniel, who was standing by the wall, smiling. Phoenix Technologies, I said. Because we rose from the ashes. Later that evening, Daniel and I stood on the balcony of the office, overlooking the city lights. You were good in there, Daniel said. Terrifying but good. I had a good partner, I replied. I'm going to Florida, he said suddenly. I turned to him. To see Gary?
Yeah, just to see.
I'm not expecting a dad. I just want to see where I got my backhand from. He chuckled. And then I'm coming back. I have ideas for logistics. We're wasting too much money on shipping. The job is yours, I said. Head of logistics. I'll earn it, he said. Start me as a manager. I don't want handouts. He put his hand on my shoulder. Clara, about the wedding dress? Yeah. You kept a piece of it, didn't you? The lace you put on Dad's grave. I did. Good, he said. Burn the rest. We don't need it anymore. I looked out at the city. He was right. The dress had done its job. It had held the secrets, protected the legacy, and delivered the weapon. But now, the box was empty. I have a better idea, I said. We don't burn it. We donate it. Donate it? To who? Who wants a cursed dress? A museum, I said. Or a theater. Somewhere where it's just a costume. Just a prop. Because that's all Elaine's marriage was. A performance. Let it be a costume for someone else's play. Daniel laughed. It was a real, genuine laugh. You're wicked, Clara. I'm a Hayes, I said, smiling. As we stood there, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Victoria. Subject, Paris. Clara, I saw the news about Marcus.
Good.
I hope he rots. I'm painting again. Not the stuff Mom made me paint, the polite landscapes. I'm painting ugly things. Angry things. It feels good. I met someone. He doesn't know who I am. He thinks I'm just a broke American girl. It's nice. Can I come home for Christmas? I promise not to throw wine. I typed back a single line. Come home. We'll leave the wine in the cellar. I put the phone away. The war was over. The monsters were in cages. And for the first time, the silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was just peace.